All right, next let's look at the pathway of blood flow. So the heart is a double pump, right? We talk about the right side and the left side. So each side is a pump. And really, when you think about it, it's each ventricle that serves as the pump, right? So the right side is related to the pulmonary circuit because if you remember, the right ventricle is going to pump blood toward the lungs, right, to get gas exchange. And the left side is related to the systemic circuit because the left ventricle will pump blood into the aorta, and aorta is going to bring the blood to all over your body, right? So that the cells can take oxygen in the oxygenated blood. We are going to look at this diagram and follow the blood pathway. Before I start, I just want to point out again, the blue color indicates this is deoxygenated blood, right? Which is the bad blood that has very little oxygen. And then the right color indicates that's the good blood that has a higher level of oxygen, okay? Higher level of oxygen. So that's the different colors. All right, now let's follow the pulmonary circuit first. So again, the goal for the pulmonary circuit is to pump blood to the lungs to get oxygenated and then return that blood back to the heart. So we're going to start on the right side. We have superior vena cava and inferior vena cava that send in the bad blood to the right atrium, right? So we're going to start right here. Start with a right atrium that contains the bad blood. Right atrium sends blood to the right ventricle. The right ventricle, which is a pump, pumps blood into the pulmonary arteries. Pulmonary arteries take blood into the lungs, right? And there is a gas exchange. And after the lungs, the blood becomes oxygenated, which you can see the color is switched to red, right? So the oxygenated blood now goes back to the heart through the pulmonary veins, right? So there are 4 pulmonary veins. And the pulmonary veins will deliver blood back to the left atrium, right? Remember the atria is plural, atrium is singular. So the 2 atria, the 2 superior smaller chambers, they're the receiving chambers. So the right atrium will receive blood from superior vena cava and inferior vena cava. And the left atrium will receive blood from the pulmonary veins. Okay. Now, once the blood enters the left atrium, then that concludes the pulmonary circuit, right? So it really starts from here and back to the atrium on the other side. So that's it. That's the pulmonary circuit. Now let's look at the systemic circuit. So for the systemic circuit, we are going to start from the left ventricle. Now remember, the left atrium has oxygenated blood, good blood. Good blood flows to the left ventricle right here. Now the left ventricle is the second pump, and it's a stronger pump. And that's because it pumps blood throughout the entire body, not just lungs, right? The lungs are very close to the heart, so it's not too hard to pump blood to the lungs. But when you look at your entire body, think about how far your feet are from your heart, right? Left ventricle really has to work much harder. So the left ventricle is usually bigger than the right ventricle, and the wall is also thicker, right? You need more cardiac muscle to pump, to contract, to pump blood. All right, now we're starting the systemic circuit. So we're going to start from the left ventricle. The left ventricle is going to pump the good blood into the aorta, right? Aorta right here. And the aorta will eventually split into smaller arteries and then even smaller arterioles that will go to your tissues. And through the tissues, you have capillaries, which are even smaller. So those blood vessels will deliver the oxygenated blood to tissues and cells. Don't worry about this part. It just kind of shows you that the branches of the aorta that will go into some of the major organs. Now, after the blood goes through, all these organs, all these tissues. Now the oxygen is picked up by cells, right? And then the cells dumps carbon dioxide. So oxygen is picked up by the cells, but the cells also dumps carbon dioxide. So after blood going through the tissues, the organs, now they come out deoxygenated, right? So now they are the bad blood. So you can see now it changes to the blue color. So the bad blood will be returned to the heart by veins, right? Smaller veins and then bigger veins, and eventually the two very big veins, superior vena cava and inferior vena cava, right? So these two veins are the two veins that are connected to the right atrium, and they will bring deoxygenated blood from the upper body, the lower body, back to the right atrium. That's it. That concludes the systemic circuit. Okay. So again, this top half, that's the pulmonary circuit, and this bottom half, that's the systemic circuit. I do want to add one more piece of information. I'm going to insert the blood vessel information into this pathway. Okay, so when blood goes from the right atrium to the right ventricle, there is tricuspid valve there, right? Tricuspid valve. So I want to put that in there. And when the ventricle pumps blood into the pulmonary arteries, there is another valve in place to prevent blood backflow, right? So in between these two structures, you have the pulmonary valve. Okay? Same thing for the systemic circuit. In between the left atrium and the left ventricle, right here, you have the bicuspid valve or the mitral valve. And in between the left ventricle and arteries, so we're going to be more specific, the left ventricle is going to pump blood to aorta first, right? Aorta branches off to different arteries. So in between that, you have aortic valve. All right, so that's it. Next, I just want to spend a little bit of time on the coronary circuit. So coronary refers to the heart. So this is a pathway where the oxygenated blood, the good blood, will go to the tissues of the heart so that the cardiac muscle cells and some of the other types of cells can pick up the oxygen, right? And then get rid of carbon dioxide. And then the deoxygenated blood will leave the cardiac tissues and cells and return back to the right atrium. Remember, right atrium is the chamber that receives the deoxygenated blood. Receives deoxygenated blood from the entire body, right? So this is basically a little circuit for the heart, right? To get oxygenated blood, to have a gas exchange at the tissues, and then for the deoxygenated blood to return, just like the blood from other parts of the body, return to the right atrium. All right, now couple things. Coronary arteries are going to bring the oxygenated blood to the heart muscle. Coronary veins will drain the deoxygenated blood back to the right atrium. When you look at this diagram, I'm going to kind of circle the important arteries, and mostly the arteries, because these arteries supply the good blood to the heart muscle, right? If one of these arteries is blocked, then the person may experience a heart attack. All right, now you can see there's going to be a right side and a left side, right? In the right side, you have the right coronary artery, and on the left side, you have the left coronary artery. Now, those are the two main arteries. They branch off the aorta. Remember, the aorta is right here. So it's going to kind of branch off a little bit, and it's going to form the right and then the left coronary arteries. So I made a chart right here, so you can see after aorta, you have these two branches. So those are the two main branches that will further branch off to smaller arteries. Now I'm gonna kind of skip the right side because most of the times the problem happens on the left side. Now when you look at the left side, the left coronary artery is going to branch off and form circumflex artery, which will kind of go back to the posterior side of the heart. As you can see, it's right here. And the other branch of the left coronary artery is this main one, the left anterior descending artery right here. That's the main one. And you can see it branches off to even smaller arteries, right? Okay. Now, this is the one that I want you to remember. So I'm going to use a different color. Let's use purple. This is the main one that I want you to remember because this left anterior descending artery is supplying blood to the left ventricle, to the cardiac muscle of the left ventricle. And remember, the left ventricle is the main chamber that pumps blood to the entire body. So if this blood vessel is blocked without oxygen, the cardiac muscle is going to die really quickly. Right? Your brain cells and your cardiac muscle cells, those cells work really hard. They have a very high energy demand. If they don't get oxygen, they can't use oxygen to generate energy from glucose. Right? So without oxygen, no energy supply, and those cells will die pretty fast, So if this main artery is blocked, then the myocardium of the left ventricle is not going to get enough oxygen, and the cells are going to die, and the person is going to experience a heart attack. I have a friend who was recently diagnosed with 80% blockage in the left anterior descending artery. So they had have a procedure to put a little kind of device in the artery to kind of open it up to allow blood flow. Okay, so I made this chart, like I said earlier, to kind of give you a general idea of the pathway of the blood flow in the coronary circuit. So you can see, after the left coronary artery, you have these two main arteries, right? And I kind of highlighted this one because this is the most important one. If it's blocked, then you are in trouble. And these arteries will send blood to all the tissues in the heart, tissues here, and then tissues do gas exchange, right? And then the veins will drain the deoxygenated blood to coronary sinus, which is connected to the right atrium. Okay? And that's the main one. Now, it has different names. Some textbooks call it anterior interventricular artery. Some textbooks call it anterior descending artery. Right, so make sure you know all the different names for this particular artery. All right, now let's look at some practice problems. Number 1, which of the following valves prevents backflow of blood from the right ventricle into the right atrium? So if you need more time to think about the question, just pause the video before I review the answer. If you have your answer now, then that's great, because I'm going to tell you what the correct answer is. Now, it's on the right side, right? And it's between the atrium and the ventricle. So it's one of the AB valves, right? And on the right side, that's going to be tricuspid, right? The bicuspid, the mitral, those are the same. Those are the same valve, and they are on the left side, right, between the atrium and the ventricle. Number 3, which of the following arteries supplies the heart with the blood? So that's going to be coronary, right? Coronary arteries. So you have a right coronary artery and you have a left coronary artery.